Good evening. My name is Tanya Taylor Rubenstein, the Global Story Coach, speaking to you from my home and studio outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico. And this evening I wanted to talk to you about, this video is really geared for those of you who are interested in becoming a professional story coach. And I want to answer the questions. One, what is a professional story coach? What do you do, Tanya? You may have some sense of an aspect of it. And two, can I really make a living at it? Is it just a fantasy to think that I could make a living coaching people on their stories? And I want to answer those questions for you because I have been doing both for over 20 years now. This has been my whole deal, my whole career. And I have to say, first of all, that I feel like the luckiest person in the world. It doesn't mean I don't have my ups and downs. It doesn't mean I haven't had my own personal struggles, but I have many. But in terms of my work in the world, the work I get to do, I feel so incredibly lucky and blessed. And I was put on my path early, and I know that that is some great good fortune or karma or whatever it was in my life. And I love sharing it with others, and I love teaching others, and I love training others, and I've been doing that for a very long time as well. So what is a story coach? What have I been doing these last 20 some years? So as many of you know, because I refer to one of my mentors, but a primary one, the late Spalding Gray. I met him when I was 20 years old, and I shifted gears from being a professional actor to knowing that I wanted to tell intimate stories on stage. And certainly my acting background helped me tremendously. And I have a writing background as well. It's not so formal as my acting background that I studied from the time I was 14 in professional academies and an acting school in New York and in college in two different professional, really professionally based acting programs at Carnegie Mellon and Emerson College. But writing, I took many workshops from the time I could put two words together. I had a propensity for writing and writing stories, but I did have to learn how to write for the stage. And that was a chop wood, carry water process for me. And I literally created a writing practice based on the creativity movement that was happening in northern New Mexico when I got here, a la Julia Sweeney. Julia Cameron, The Artist's Way. Love Julia Sweeney. Natalie Goldberg, Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird. Those books and some workshops doing that kind of work to help me open tremendously, to create a regular writing practice, a regular improvisational practice to create my first show and to be successful in that way. But in terms of teaching others, it all began after and becoming a professional story coach. It all began after the success of my second show. And the way it really started was people were coming to my solo shows. I was getting great reviews. It was really satisfying with the audiences and with the press and getting known in my community in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And it's one of the things I'll talk about later in terms of making a living, having a deep root system in your own community as a story coach, as well as creating work online and programs online. I think it really is the marriage of both in this kind of work, depth-based story work. And women started saying to me in particular, I want to tell my story. I want to do what you're doing. Some had acting backgrounds, writing backgrounds, some didn't. But I started out by creating a workshop for people to do 10-minute writing and performance pieces in front of an audience. And it really took off from there. And I continued to develop programs over these last 20 years and very successful programs. And I developed a transformational monologue process where I did that same process of creating and performing 10-minute monologues for non-professionals, but gearing them towards particular topics. So the first topic I tackled was people who'd experienced cancer and created something called the Cancer Monologue Project. It went on and became a book. It was in Oprah's magazine. It had a life of its own, and I knew I was really onto something. At that point, I ended up doing shows all over the country, each show unique and different, with different groups of people who'd experienced cancer, either themselves or with a family member, and it had a story they wanted to share to their friends, family, and community. So that was my way in. I began coaching short solo performance workshops and then cancer monologue workshops, and it took off from there. Worked with folks with mental illness, worked with a lot of people dealing with trauma, transition, loss, worked with new mothers, sexual abuse survivors, veterans with PTSD, all giving them the sacred, safe space with boundaries, as well as the tools to unlock their stories and have the opportunity to have a once-in-a-lifetime experience for most of them, to stand on stage and be witnessed in their stories. It was very deep work, very deep shamanic work. I now don't do those anymore myself in terms of leading the events. I covered over 40 topics and did over 100 shows. Now I train others. I've been training others to be professional story healer facilitators for the last probably around 7 or 8 years or so. Then I went back to my roots as an actor and solo performer and created probably my most well-known service, the Solo Performance Boot Camp, where people fly in from all over the world to work with me on their one-person shows that are done at theaters, conferences, festivals, all over the place. They come here and work it out with me, or we do it on Skype now because that's available, though I really prefer working with people in person, though there's always an aspect of finishing up the script on Skype. I branched out. I ended up editing 2 books that were published and branched out into memoir, coaching memoir. That really came after I was offered a gig, which I kept for 7 years whenever I was in Santa Fe, meeting weekly in an elders community with a very savvy, sophisticated group of 80 and 90-year-olds, 80s, 90s in terms of the decades, who were all writing their memoirs. And we had 11 books published in that group of 8 people. Some people wrote more books than one, mostly memoir, a couple of poetry books, and we had a group anthology that we wrote that each contributed a piece to. I wrote the preface and edited the book. And from doing that work really was working with understanding myself, organic structure in memoir, and then created a class with one of my dear friends who's an editor at New Mexico Magazine, has published her own memoir as well as edited 3 anthologies, Candace Walsh. We were a great balance, creating a course called Author It, and helped many people write and publish their memoirs in a 6-month course. Many people took it twice to do the process over the course of a year, and worked on book proposals and whatnot with folks. From there, I started getting, I got a reputation as a story coach, as somebody who deeply and intimately knew stories. And it's interesting because I went through all these phases with them, and all of a sudden I was getting asked by visionary conferences like the Bioneers in Marin County to come out and teach a workshop on storytelling for visionaries and entrepreneurs in the new paradigm. Getting even asked by, I had some crazy things working with folks in the insurance industry, on how people could become more accessible through using storytelling as a tool for emotional intelligence in their industry. Started working with small organizations as well as other entrepreneurs on their brand stories. And all of a sudden, brand story became hot. It has become hot. You know, and I forgive me if I'm going to have a little bit of eye rolling here, but, you know, for some brand story and people out there saying they're teaching brand story, it's just another word for marketing and selling, and it comes from that place. And their background is not as deep storytellers. I do have a little bit of a pet peeve. You'll see a little bit of my own whatever stuff here. But, you know, particularly people who go off and get some fancy MBAs and then, oh, we're going into big corporations and, you know, and I'm the great brand storyteller. You know, I think all brand storytellers who are training others and working with individuals and with corporations and with executives should have a root system as deep storytellers themselves, because it's not formulaic. It's there are elements and there are rules that work in any form of storytelling, from solo performance to brand storytelling to memoir to doing a story-based TED-style talk, which is another thing I coach people on. But it's all based in the root system of profoundly understanding story, structure, and form in a natural and organic way. And one little funny aside, I mean, I just did see something online where a sort of rather well-known brand storyteller said something like, you know, you have to have your brand story, I guess, for copy, for websites, you know, whatnot, for all your marketing material. And he said, but it doesn't matter how you deliver it. Well, in my experience, nothing could be further from the truth for really powerful and effective brand storytelling. The best TED Talks, you watch them, it is all about embodiment. And neuroscience know this, that, you know, and have communicated this to us for years, and there's more and more research out of places like Harvard and Stanford and University of Texas, Austin, about how storytelling affects the brain. There's emotional intelligence stuff, wonderful stuff coming out from researchers like Brené Brown on vulnerability, EQ. It's all connected. It is so essential, not just the words of our story, but how do we tell it? How do we embody it? How do we live it in ourselves? I always say you can't fake it. You know, you can have this story, but it'll come off contrived if you're just doing it to sell a product. You know, if the words are going out there, but the researchers let us know that words are only about 10 to 15% of how we communicate with each other. If how you're viewing me right now has to do with my feelings, my experiences, my authenticity, do you read me as authentic or am I contrived? You know, and people can see through it. And if you say to people, particularly in the business world, well, it doesn't matter how you express the story as long as you've got, you know, this point and this point and this point. I can say nothing could be further from the truth. So anyway, all of those, that's my long-winded way. And yes, I'm a talker, and I have an infinite amount to say about storytelling. It is, along with my love for my daughter, the great passion of my life. And because I know how it changes lives for the better in so many contexts and all over the world. And it's one of the deepest, most essential parts of our humanity is our ability to tell stories and share with each other. Can you make a living at this? Yes, you can make an excellent living at it. And it depends on many factors. Do you have strong training and a root system in story? Are you willing to learn it? You know, are you going to be willing to do live events and focus stories and your story services in specific ways where there are needs, and create a deep root system through your own story work and the story work you do in your community or other communities you connect to, as well as looking to do workshops online. I feel that it's essential, particularly for brand storytellers, to first be planting their flag in the ground and doing deep work with themselves and with real people. It's also, in terms of making money at this work, it's about consciousness. Because there are stories that work and resonate with people and stories that don't. So it's really about where your consciousness sits and where your intention sits. I think the best, strongest people that I've trained in this work, other story coaches that I respect professionally, have some traits in common. Enormous hearts is right up there. The ability to listen and listen between the lines, to listen between the words, to mirror back to somebody what is it you're most essentially wanting to say. To learning, and this is something that can be taught, and I do teach this in my trainings to people, to titrate, which is a medical term. How do you find the right dosage of compelling personal story married to vision, to mission, to greater calling, to teaching without pontificating or being preachy? How do you merge and marry these things? That's an art. And it is something that can be learned, that titration. It's almost like a dance. I think that natural healers, people who are therapists, counselors, certainly actors and performers, writers, the creative folks, the creative and the empathetic folks are the very best professional story coaches. Their marketing materials may not be as slick. They may not have as many Twitter followers as some of the MBAs doing this work. But this is the heart and the soul of this work. And I offer 2 programs if you're interested in doing this work professionally. One is online, and it's called S School, and it will be offered, this is early 2016, it will be offered later in 2016 as a full online program with all my curriculum and how to work with folks in terms of coaching on story, with memoir, brand coaching, story-based talks, solo performances, and being a creativity coach, which is the root of all story, to do it in an embodied, imaginative, original, unique way that grabs people and that claims it as our own. And people can also work with me privately. I take people through, it's often people who have done solo shows with me, memoirs with me, who I've directed, who then realize they want to start their own coaching, story coaching business. And it can be formed in a way as unique as who you are, what the emphasis is, whether it's going to be working with elders in retirement communities on their stories, as I did for many years, whether it's going to be, your starting point is going to be as a memoir coach, starting point is going to be as a brand coach looking for visionary entrepreneurial clients, or a brand coach looking for corporate clients. I can tell you one thing, they may sound different to people, but the basis of how to tell a great story is the same. And once you learn that, and you learn the basic organic structures, as well as learn to bring your full presence and embodiment to this work, you can communicate it to others. And I'll tell you what, I meet amazing people every day from all over the world. That's what I do here in Santa Fe, or I travel and direct shows on the East Coast, the West Coast. I'm hired by organizations where I go in and do transformational and therapeutic work, or where I do brand storytelling. And though the services are framed slightly different, so people in those organizations can understand, what I'm doing is I am showing up with my full presence and my full heart, deeply listening and helping extract what people most essentially need to communicate to achieve their own authentic expression in a way that is going to reach out to the people that they want to reach out to and communicate in business, in life, in their art, and it's all connected. Have a great night.